Now, tonight, I want to discuss a topic that has made national headlines due to a decision by the president. There is nothing more valuable to us as Americans than these words. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. We Americans believe that no man should rule over the future of another man. Cuba has been part of American foreign policy since the Spanish-American War and its independence on May 20th, 1902. During the first half-century of its independence, Cuba saw amazing growth in national and individual wealth. In 1957, Cuba had a lower infant mortality rate than France, Italy, or West Germany. Per capita, it had more doctors and nurses than Britain, more cars than Italy, and the fifth highest number of TVs in the world. Americans made Cuba a vacation destination. Tourism exploded. News stories and authors like Ernest Hemingway turned the island into a Caribbean paradise with a musical rhythm that made the whole world want to stand up and dance. In 1959, it all came to an end when Fidel Castro established a dictatorship, plunging the Cuban people into misery for 56 years. Cubans fled by the thousands to Spain, Puerto Rico, Mexico, and the United States. In January 1966, a pregnant mother, her husband, and 4 sons, all under the age of 13, stood in a crowded Havana airport, waiting for a plane to Madrid. They were stripped of everything they owned. The children watched as government officials took away their mother's wedding ring. They left penniless with only their homemade coats made from used potato sacks. I know this story well, because among the children was a 7-year-old boy named Art Linares, who 46 years later would see his son become a Connecticut state senator. My grandmother left behind her entire family. Her self-imposed exile in a foreign nation was done for the future of her children. She would not be able to return for the funerals of her father, her mother, and her brother. Her paradise island was now gone. The government in Cuba is a dictatorship that has stayed in power not because of the will of the people, but rather because they destroyed the will of the people. Today, this former island paradise is a poor nation where there is little hope. Old Havana, once a picturesque city with beautiful buildings, now those buildings are collapsing to rubble because of the dictatorship's neglect. The saddest part of the voices that had never been heard. According to the professor of political science at the University of Hawaii, Rudolph Rommel, the number of executions ordered by Castro amount to 33,000. Executions carried out by his brother Raul, who today rules Cuba with the same iron fist his brother did. The Castro brothers have become wealthy, while political prisoners suffer in their jails. Among these prisoners was Eusebio Penalver, one of the longest-serving black political prisoners in the last century, jailed longer than Nelson Mandela. Yet his name has never been mentioned by President Obama. One must wonder about the president's sudden interest in Cuba. President Obama knew that his policy of appeasement would continue his politics of division, dividing instead of uniting a country, taking attention away from his foreign policy failures. Failures in Ukraine, North Korea, Syria, and ISIS. All failures because of a poorly planned foreign policy by this president and former Secretary of State Hillary Clinton. The president is aware that only an act of Congress can lift many restrictions, but after a massive midterm loss, he needed to change the narrative to Cuba, and that became his target. Recently, the president found it unimportant that the United States attend an anti-terrorist unity rally in Paris, while calling on Secretary Kerry to go to Cuba and begin plans for an embassy with a nation that has a history of supporting and exporting terrorists. Now let me make this point. Do I believe that complete isolation of Cuba should be our policy? No, I do not. Do I believe that we need to open channels of communication? Yes, I do. Real leadership means engaging those in government who believe in a Cuba after Castro. Ronald Reagan said of the Soviet Union, "They are the focus of evil in the modern world," and that their brand of communism would end up in the ash heap of history. He said this during a time of dialogue with the Soviets, and he used every opportunity to let the Soviet Union know that their future can be better. President Reagan was direct, bold, and proven right. Cuba holds the opportunity to become not just a positive member of the family of nations, but also a thriving economic engine for the entire Caribbean. Fertile land, perfect year-round climate, an educated population, and some of the most beautiful beaches in the world, together with a successful Cuban-American community willing to invest in a free Cuba, makes it one of the biggest financial opportunities of our time. Cuba must understand that their current system of government is not the solution to its problems, but is the problem. Let this great nation of ours be the hope of the Cuban people and those who live in freedom. Let us be straightforward with the government in Havana that for every step America takes, that they must also take a step towards democracy and freedom for their people. Cuba is only 90 miles away from the shores of our country. Not to agree to some level of discourse would be irresponsible on our part. Cuba must know that working with America comes with a price. Dialogue is a two-way street. We have a golden opportunity that requires a qualified and focused administration, acting in unison with Congress. My friends, my grandmother died never seeing a free Cuba. My grandfather will be 92 years old in just 6 months. He and a million other Cuban-born Americans wish to die knowing that Cuba is on the road to becoming the island of their youth. Tonight, I say to all of you, let us come together and work for the end of the last dictatorship in the Western Hemisphere. Thank you. I leave you with the words that have often been heard in the homes of Cuban Americans and were repeated by Ronald Reagan when he visited Miami in the 1980s. Viva Cuba Libre. Cuba sí, Castro no. Thank you. God bless you. God bless America. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, guys.